Hi, my name is Dr. Atasha Jordan, and I am a psychiatry resident in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining. I am really excited about today's conversation. It's actually a two-part conversation. One, we'll talk about culture and mental health. The second, we'll talk about spirituality and mental health. And I am chatting with dear friend Katie Piura. She is a therapist and mental health advocate, and she also happens to be Christian as well. And this conversation I thought was just so important. Someone that I wanted to have it with her because, being able to talk from these shared perspectives to really be able to get the ideas out on what is spiritual health, what is mental health, how are they related, how are they different, how do we recognize spiritual health, how do we recognize mental health or challenges that we might have. So that's why we wanted to have this conversation with you all. So excited to hop into it. But before we get started, your friendly reminder, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Feel free to follow me on social media at Atasha Jordan. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. So with all that, now it's time to hop into the video.
I am really excited today because I'm going to have a really important conversation on faith and mental health with Atasha Jordan. Would you mind introducing yourself, Atasha?
Sure thing. So first off, thank you so much, Katie, for just creating this space and allowing us to be able to have this conversation. Intro, so my name is Dr. Atasha Jordan. I am a psychiatry resident in Philadelphia, and I really am doing work specifically in the space of mental health as a specialty in psychiatry. And for me, I grew up Christian, and that for me has been a huge part of my life experience, and my experiences as a Christian have really centered a lot of the way that I think about life. And I think now that I am embarking on this career in psychiatry and focusing so much on mental health, I am really excited to be able to combine those two passions and those two aspects of my life, talking about mental health, but also talking about faith. So really excited to kind of just jump into this conversation.
I'm really excited too, Atasha, and I'm really excited to have you. So like Atasha said, her field is in psychiatry, and my field is in mental health as well as a therapist, and I've practiced therapy for 6 years, and I've shared this before in my channel, and I've also highlighted how important faith it is to me as well. And so just combining the two, mental health and faith / spirituality, is a very important conversation that I'm excited to have and that we're going to have today. So basically the goals of our conversation will be to just address, how mental health and spirituality can intersect. Start talking a little bit about culture and mental health. And so I just wanted to ask you, Atasha, if you can share what are your thoughts on how culture and mental health intersect.
Yeah, so I think it's a really great point to start off in culture, because I'd say faith is one subsect of culture. And when we're thinking of culture more broadly, right, so there are the different aspects, whether it's ethnicity, you're talking about someone's nationality, faith is part of that. We think about music, food, all of that is culture if we're thinking about it broadly, right? But when we're thinking about how culture is related to our mental health, you have to start there, because there are so many differences in the ways that, people coming from different backgrounds, the way that those cultural identities even just think about the idea of what it is to have a mental health disorder, or to the point where if you even think that mental health is an entity in and of itself. Because I think there's some cultures where people will say it's demonic, or it's something that's more related to a greater spiritual issue when there are mental health struggles at play. So if you have to be able to really recognize where someone is coming from with these conversations, so that we can really open up the dialogue in a way that's going to be understandable for people when we're talking about mental health. So I think that's why culture is so important to recognize. And for me, like the cultural identities that I tend to kind of relate to, so I relate to being someone from the Caribbean. I am a Black woman living in America, and all of that culture that I embody relates then to how I think about mental health. And then there's obviously the Christian component as well of my culture. So with all of that, now it's the experiences I had growing up. Were conversations about mental health common for me? No, they weren't. They were not common at all. And it really took years of even just getting to college and recognizing the frameworks of how people in other cultures, so in college, you're facing people from other countries, other cities, other religious backgrounds, recognizing that they have other viewpoints. And it helped me to then kind of inform my own thoughts on what mental health is like generally, but then also how I want to engage with it as a Black, Christian, Caribbean-born woman.
And how have you seen culture intersect in your practice with your patients?
Yeah, so I think it's really important where we think about the idea that I'm in Philadelphia, and we're working with people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. We're working with people from different countries, even just different parts of the city. Philly is diverse, but also very segregated. So recognizing that the way that my patients think about mental health, or even separate from that, the way that they live their lives can be different from person to person. And we have to think about how we give culturally informed care, right? So I think culturally speaking, an example that I can give is one time where on the unit, in an inpatient unit, because that's where I've been working most recently, there was a patient, a Black woman. She was, she had a little itch going on in her scalp. And as a Black woman, I very readily identified that the little pat, it just means your scalp is itching. Whereas there were others on the team who literally the words were noted bizarre behavior. So that's just an idea of, I had to in that moment kind of give some culturally informed teaching and just kind of open up that conversation that, oh no, like this is not a bizarre behavior that she's patting her head. This is normal within the culture of Black women to pat your head if your scalp is itchy. So that's like a funny example, but also not really, because sometimes if you're not culturally informed, then it can be maybe detrimental to the care that we're providing for our patients.
Yeah, and I can relate to that as well, just how seeing culture play out and then pathologizing it to some kind of mental health issue when you have to be, I think that there has to be a level of cultural competence in practice. So, practitioners can identify what's cultural, what's actually part of their mental health symptoms. And I just love that we're having this conversation because there needs to be like more diversity and inclusion in the mental health field to have people who can, like they don't have to have like years of training in they just know how to identify, like this is something that I recognize that it's a cultural thing. Like, so in my practice, so I work with majority of Black and Latino youth. My practice has been with children. And so with children, there is the cultural component, and then there is also the developmental component, which, at times we forget because some of these kids have mental health symptoms or have trauma that, we forget to kind of highlight or identify their developmental stage. And some of it is just they're just being a teenager or they're just being a child, right? And then there is the other cultural component with their caregivers, because I also work with their caregivers. And so I have seen a lot of shame for parents of, you're not doing this enough, you're not doing that enough, you're not being assertive enough, you're not doing this way. But I guess an example that I can think of is like a lot of times, if kids are in crisis, you have to call the police, you have to, but sometimes, there might be a lot of shame for caregivers for not reaching out to the police in a timely manner, or not, doing things a certain way as expected. But I think that there is a lot of fear, especially in like Black and brown communities. And I can speak on like specifically the Latino community. There is the issue of immigration and the issue of like whether that family or not is undocumented. Are they going to look onto my undocumented status if I reach out to the police? There's just a lot of fear. So I think that there is a lot of privilege in reaching out, in some families reaching out to the police and feeling safe, as opposed to some families feeling fear and feeling insecure. And on top of that, there is also a cultural component that in the Latino community, there is this element of like, you are, it's not that we can't be assertive, but there is a lot of like, I'm shy to ask these questions. I'm shy to, like, how am I going to come off in this conversation? And so there is like a power struggle. And so I think I really like what you mentioned, Atasha, and that it is very important to highlight culture.
Yeah, because, I think when we're understanding all of that life experience, so as you're saying, from the immigrant perspective, especially if you are someone who's an undocumented immigrant, that the ideas of the baseline struggles that you deal with, we can't address the potential pathologic mental health issues if we don't fully understand the lived experience that our patients have, right? So I 100% agree, like the culture is at the base of it. And faith, as I said before, is kind of just one part, but it's important for us as providers to try to understand all the faith. But then I think or not all the faith, but understand all the different parts of culture. But then more than that, because we can't know everything, recognizing the importance of teamwork and having teams that are diverse. So diverse from a training background, diverse from actual cultural backgrounds ourselves, because that's the way that we can kind of collectively be as all-knowing as possible when we think about the different cultures and different experiences our patients have.
Yeah, and that's just a really great thing. And I think that with the conversations that we're having now, team leaders are trying to diversify their teams and things like that. But again, it is very difficult with the systemic challenges that exist. I also want to touch on, how does culture, in your opinion, intersect with faith and mental health?
Yeah, so, it's the way I think about it is this idea that faith is one section of our culture. So with that, now we think about the idea that there's spirituality and that people who are of faith, and in the US, it is still by far the vast majority of people in this country who are spiritual to some extent and or religious. And the idea that our spiritual health and our mental health are actually two very different things, I don't think is a conversation that is had often enough. And what that leads to is, coming from that culture, there are a lot of churches, and I hope that this is something that is kind of changing in this day and age, but churches where they are encouraging people to kind of pray away the anxiety, or pray away the worry or the depression or whatever it is or pray away addiction, things of that nature, recognizing, obviously, I am a Christian myself, that faith has an important part, but then it blocks us from recognizing the roles that medication and therapy have when we're thinking about addressing issues with mental health. So for me, the intersection is important because the faith component of our culture can really be help when we're thinking about treating and even preventing some mental illness. But I feel like a lot of times the spiritual side can sometimes be a deterrent from getting care when we need it.
All right, so I hope that you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I know Katie and I had such a good time just chatting, catching up, and really discussing some important issues, topics that are important to us, talking about mental health, spirituality, culture, and how those are all related. And, if you want to hear more about either of what we're doing, either from me or from Katie, feel free to find Introspective Piura. That's Katie's YouTube channel, my YouTube channel. If you haven't hit subscribe already, go on ahead and do that. And then you can also follow me on social media at Atasha Jordan. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and on Pinterest. Until next time, bye.